I've been wanting to talk to you guys for some time now about this topic of the comorbidity, if you will, or the coexistence of autism with or without intellectual disability in people who have congenital blindness. Now, I've been a little bit reluctant to share this, my thoughts and my experiences with you because, and this is my disclaimer right now, is that I'm not an expert in the field. I am not a teacher, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a therapist. I'm a mom. I am an adoptive mother of 6 special needs kids, all congenitally blind. That means that they were all born blind, and an adoptive mom. And between the 6 kids who are now young adults, they have 4 different types of congenital blindness. Now, of my 6 kids, 3 of them also have autism. 2 of them also have intellectual disability. Now, many of you are living with multiple disabilities, and you know the challenges that we face. What happens when a child is very young, and specifically what I want to talk about in relation to this topic is self-stimulatory behavior, or stimming. These are oftentimes, the only outward indicator or symptom, if you will, of the presence of autism. But here's the thing. When you have a child who is born blind, they also have a tendency to engage in self-stim behavior. Sometimes it is very, very difficult to tease out the difference. They might look very similar in the beginning, but I think that the difference is that someone who is neurotypical and has no other diagnosis or condition except for the blindness, congenital or otherwise, they tend to mature and outgrow most of these behaviors. The stims that we refer to in kids who are blind, we call them blindisms. They'll do things like rock their heads back and forth. They have a tendency to poke their eyes. I have a house full of eye pokers here. Most of them have outgrown that particular behavior. There's hand flapping when we get excited. There is the avoidance of social contact or not knowing exactly how to approach someone in social situations. As I've said, most people who are born blind that don't have the presence of these other diagnoses, they'll outgrow that. The difference is that most of my kids, with the exception of one, have not outgrown these behaviors. In fact, they have become more and more intense through the years. Now, it's very, very difficult it's impossible to get a diagnosis of autism when your child just happens to be blind. Because this is the thing, and professionals, I'm talking to you professionals, you psychologists and doctors and therapists and even the teachers, you look at blindness as if it is such a catastrophic, all-encompassing, total, absolute disability that is just beyond devastating, that many of you are not able to see beyond that to be able to say, there's something else at play here. There's something else going on. It's nearly impossible. The tests that are given for IQ and for autism, they're visual. And so if your child is blind, that's very, very difficult. Now, if they happen to have intellectual disability on top of that, you can forget about it. I'm told that there are no existing comprehensive tests that are reliable for kids who have autism with or without intellectual disability and are also blind. The tests don't exist. So how do we get our diagnosis? How do we get our support services? How do we help professionals working with our children to understand just exactly who they are? You can't. Very often you just can't. And studies are beginning to show that there is a much higher incidence of autism in kids who are congenitally blind, and all 6 of our kids are congenitally blind with no light perception whatsoever, which in itself is a very rare condition. Only 10% of people who are blind are totally blind with no light perception, and all 6 of our kids have that. So what happens is these behaviors, these stims that present themselves and go beyond the norm, they continually get dismissed. Let's take a look at that next year. Let's wait a little while. Let's see how their transition into middle school goes, or their transition into high school. Next thing you know, your child is completely aged out of the programs and any ability to get any support for their autism whatsoever. Now, I'm specifically referring to our daughter, Jessie, who is now 19 years old. Now, in Jessie's case, she has retinopathy of prematurity. In 2 of our other kids who are on the spectrum, they both have anophthalmia. And recent studies have suggested that those 2 congenital blind conditions have a high incidence of autism as well. Now, that alone should cause the professionals to take pause and pay attention to this. We have taken our kids to 2 different, very prestigious, very well-known places in our area to be tested. Once when they were very, very young, and they were given IQs, Abby and Jessie both were given IQs that were so low that they wouldn't possibly be able to function in any way. They wouldn't be able to walk. They wouldn't be able to talk. They wouldn't be able to eat. That's how low the IQs given to them were. Now, the other place that we have taken Jessie very recently is the Keller Center. They do autistic diagnostic testing. Well, this is where I discovered that there's no test for Jessie. We're just going to let you go. I'm going to do what I can do, he said, in the research, and I'm going to see what I can come up with for you, but nothing ever happened. I waited over a year for that evaluation. Now, he observed Jessie a couple of times. He told me, in fact, she performed, those of you who know her, know that she has an amazing, amazing voice, and she has perfect pitch, but she's nonverbal autistic. Now, he told us that Jessie actually shows savant tendencies. Savant is an aspect of the autism spectrum disorders, and in it itself is a broad spectrum. So there are very few people living, they say less than 100 that are living today, that exhibit those very intense and amazing talents that the movies and that portray of someone who is a savant. Jessie may be on that spectrum, but she's not gifted to that ability. She also has intellectual disability. Now, her IEP, her primary diagnosis for many years was blindness. That's how she became eligible for services, for special ed, and everything else. And as time has gone on, and we've realized that that is not Jessie's primary diagnosis. Many years went by, we finally got the primary diagnosis changed to intellectual disability. But here's what happens, and I think, you guys can understand what I'm trying to say. Anyone who exhibits the kind of musical talent and the ability and the perfect pitch and the memory for music that young lady has, I'm going to say that intellectual disability is also not her primary diagnosis. Her primary diagnosis should be autism. And the reason for that is that IEP is a legal document. That IEP goes with her for the rest of her life. And that IEP is used for any professional, anyone who's working with her at any point in her school career or beyond. Anything she does, the first thing they want to see is that IEP. Now, when it leads with intellectual disability or blindness, the person reading the IEP and delivering services doesn't know who Jessie really is. This is a battle that we've been fighting for many, many years. The school does not acknowledge Jessie's autism diagnosis. They don't. This is a problem. What has happened with Jessie, although she does receive special education services, for the most part, we're very happy. They work well with the kids, and they do what they do. But Jessie has never once in her entire life had the privilege or opportunity to work with anyone who was specifically expert in dealing with kids with autism. She's worked with people who are well versed in working with kids with intellectual disability, but she's never had the opportunity to have any of those positive things about her worked with, teased out. Her progress, I believe, has been thwarted because of it. She's never, a lot of you ask me, do your kids get ABA therapy? Well, I've asked for ABA therapy at every IEP meeting for the last, I don't even know how many years, and all I can ever get through the school is a consult. Now, Jessie recently received a Medicaid waiver, and although the Medicaid waiver does not allow for services with ABA, Medicaid does. And guess what I was told? The insurance companies will only provide ABA services to people who are under the age of 18. So our daughter Jessie has literally aged out of any opportunity to help her progress in any area, and she's not given credit or helped along the way with the intellect that she does have. And she is a smart little girl. She's smarter than she gets credit for. She just is. And if I could send her to a school that was 100% music therapy, that's what I would do. Music therapy has been the most beneficial thing for Jessie, therapy for Jessie all along. She never spoke any words until she started receiving music therapy. She was never able to hold the cane, the white cane in her hand for orientation and mobility skill until they combined the music therapy with the O&M lessons. So this is really, really important. And I know that there are other parents out there. It's kind of unusual, really, to have, they call it the comorbidity, the coexistence of autism with or without intellectual disability alongside congenital blindness. I'd like to point out some of the differences of some of these typical and not so, mostly typical self-stim behaviors. I have not shared a lot of the details of all of these things. It's very important for us here on our channel to protect the dignity of our children. So there are many things about our kids and many, things that we deal with, and symptoms, behaviors, features, if you will, of their different diagnoses that we don't discuss just in the interest of protecting their dignity. So what I think I'd like to do, because this is a very important video in my opinion, what I'd like to do is discuss some of those previously untalked about behaviors, not mentioning specific kids' names, and I'm going to mix them up. There are many of these behaviors that are exhibited by different kids in our family, and it doesn't matter who does what or anything like that. That really is not pertinent information here. What matters is that we're trying to show the difference between your typical blind stims, if you will. And forgive me if my language is wrong. Forgive me if if I haven't learned the proper inclusive language. I really want to learn that more. I don't know everything. We've been doing this for 2 decades, and we don't know everything there is to know about every single disability and condition out there. And so if I do slip up, I'm going to ask you now for that extra measure of grace. That's not what we need to discuss in the comments, and it's really it's not intentional in any way, shape, or form. But these blindisms, or some of the stims that go along with blindness, there are also things that don't go along. I've never seen any neurotypical blind child ever exhibiting these behaviors. And if any of you have seen that, please let's talk about that in the comments below, during this video. One of those behaviors that we've not discussed before is that of spitting. Now, spitting, I mean really spitting, okay? Thankfully, I hear about a lot of kids who do this projectile spitting, and thankfully I don't have that. I have one who just spits. It's a self-stim, oral self-stim behavior. I have another one who actually will, and please, again, forgive me, I don't mean to be so graphic, but will actually bring that up, play with it, put it in the hair, put it on the face, play with the hands, all of that. That is not a typical behavior for someone who is simply blind. You might possibly see that in someone who has intellectual disability, but I'm going to say that behavior goes to the sensory aspect of autism. I think that one specifically belongs in the autism category. Some of them overlap. This one I don't think does. Another one of these behaviors that I don't believe overlaps, we all know who this child is, so it's just, we laugh about it. What else are you going to do? But this behavior is one of stripping, taking one's clothes off, all of them, every chance you get, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, because, that's just the sensory input for the moment, is to take your clothes off. And it's something that we deal with. You only can laugh about it. I had another child who did that when they were very young, who does not have autism, but does have intellectual disability. But that person learned not to do that. That's the difference, you see? Now, some of you'll say to me, why do you correct and try to redirect this child in their stimming behavior, but you don't try to correct or redirect this other child in their stimming behavior? And we're talking now about the one who does the suction cupping, who likes to put their hands on other people's stomachs and, make the noises, and will do anything to get a rise out of somebody and a good laugh. That child, that young lady that I'm speaking to, she knows the difference. She's doing her self-stimming. It is self-stimming, but it is also for the purpose of getting a rise out of other people. She's a comedian. She likes to make people laugh. And the intellectual disability will cause her to not understand the social aspect of appropriateness when it comes to invading other people's personal space or making noises when it's not appropriate, when you're working, when you're at school, and this sort of thing. She can learn the difference. She knows the difference. She can be trained and she can learn the difference. She's not doing it as a sensory thing at all. It's simply something she does, and it goes along. I'm going to put that one in the intellectual disability category. So our kids who have severe autism, and our one who has a very high functioning autism, who's not on the intellectual disability spectrum at all. She has probably an average IQ. Again, it's very hard to get an IQ test that is reliable on someone who's blind, but I think it's pretty accurate that we're in the lower end of the average range on that one. The other two, and the criteria is for intellectual disability, is if the IQ is 70 or below. 70 would be considered borderline intellectual ability. Below that would fall into the intellectual disability category. We have mild intellectual disability in one of our children. We have a moderate intellectual disability, and we have two with severe intellectual disability. One of them is very severe intellectual disability. And that in that child, the intellectual disability is his primary diagnosis, is and should be. You see the difference? Now, our daughter who is higher functioning on the spectrum, we've previously called it Asperger's. Now they're levels now from what I understand, but she's considered higher functioning because, she does have the average IQ supposedly, and probably. And she used to, when she was younger, she would engage in a lot more, really prevalent self-stim behavior, namely and mostly the hand flapping. The hands would go, 100 miles an hour, and the feet would go at the same time. And that was, from what we gathered back then, mostly had to do with the blindism. And yet we were not aware for many, many years that there was a presence of autism with her. And I will tell you that we've never, in that particular case, received an actual diagnosis. We've not been able to. It's been called a processing disorder. Well, it's a processing disorder because she has high functioning autism, but it's a battle, you guys, to get these things, on paper, and, it's just a battle. But she'll exhibit some of those same kinds of behaviors even to this day. You'll see her, but it's very quiet, and it's very mild because she's been trained and she's been, taught what's socially acceptable and appropriate, and, and that sort of thing. Now, one of the indicators there in that higher functioning category, and the reason that one of the reasons, there are many, I mean, you go through the checklist and it's just like check, 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 every single box. But the inability to really, the rigid routines are a thing. That's a very strong indicator right there, where you fall apart when the routine falls apart. And also being stuck in, the things that they like to, their activities, and the things that they enjoy doing, and the things that they're really good at, or the things that that they're drawn to, or whatever. There is an inability to come into an age appropriate place with, the kind of music that we like, and the kind of shows that we watch, and the kinds of activities that we like to participate in. And I think that is a very strong indicator that this is not just because a person is blind. And obviously there's not an intellectual disability. This is, I'm going to put that in the autism category. Now, in that young lady, you'll also notice a very high functioning ability when it comes to music. There is a strength, there is an aspect of genius almost, if you will, because her brain is so focused on that music. The talent is extreme. Again, perfect pitch. And research is also showing that many of these people who are congenitally blind and have autism, a common indicator with them is that they have perfect pitch. They almost always have a very strong musical interest and musical ability, but that perfect pitch is something that should really be paid very close attention to. We've seen it time and time again that's there, that's existent. And it is so far beyond the other abilities that you have to pay attention to that too. I think those things are very strong indicators. Now, some of the other behaviors that are much more difficult to discuss, and these are socially inappropriate behaviors that, if someone is blind and neurotypical, they're not engaging in inappropriate self-stimulatory behaviors that would fall into a category of behaviors that are, let's just say, without filter and lacking discretion. Listen, it's a thing. And it's something that, someone who is neurotypical, who that could be an intellectual disability thing. It can also be an autistic feature. I know that many of you do understand this. I think that it's difficult for me to maturely discuss it. And again, we're trying to maintain dignity here. So, you know, we're not going to discuss the person in this particular case, but it's a situation where it does not matter where you are. It's impossible to redirect. It's a very serious um, it's a very serious stim that is there's hardly anything that I know of, and I don't know, if some of these therapies, had we been able to access them early on, I don't know if they could have helped in that area or not. But many of you do understand the pain that goes along with this particular one. It is severe, and it isolates families. There's not much you can do. You can't, there's not too many places you can go. You have to have your escape route. You have to be mindful of, where you're sitting, and, who could possibly be, what people can see, or what people might understand or not understand. I mean, that's a big one right there. Now, another indicator, I think, that is not does not have to do solely with blindness, and that is the volume of one's voice. When someone is so loud or so high pitched, and they cannot understand that their voice is so loud, you can't make them understand, it just is loud. I think that's an autism thing. Another stim that is not related to blindness, but is probably related to autism. And it goes along with the volume of one's voice, that is the repetitive words, the repetitive tones, the go, 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 honey, 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 one word, one syllable, one tone, one repetitive song, over and over and over and over again. It is an attempt at communication from someone who is a nonverbal autistic. That's been my observation. That is what I've come to believe. I think that is accurate. And you guys can tell me if you have those kind of situations and similar experiences in your life. As far as the testing goes, and the doctors and the therapists and people that are trying to work with people who have multiple disabilities, these people really do need to be well versed and very articulate and knowledgeable in each and every category. For example, our teachers, therapists, and doctors really have to have a very clear understanding of the developmental life of a person who is congenitally blind. You need to have that knowledge and that understanding first and foremost before you can ever possibly begin to understand the other disabilities and the other diagnosis. It's very important for someone who is blind to have access to their vision people and their mobility training, and people who need to understand how a typical blind child develops and behaves, so that they can begin to see things that are not quite typical and that might indicate the presence of some other diagnosis, such as autism. It is equally important for someone who has autism to have access to the training and the medical expertise and of someone who is very well versed, knowledgeable, and expert in the area of autism. These things are it seems like common sense and so simple, but that rarely happens. You get put into one category as a primary category, and all the other diagnoses fall by the wayside and get ignored. They get misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all. And the client, the child, the student, they never have access to the correct services that they need to progress in their life. It's a big deal. Now, moving forward into transition of adulthood, I'm going to tell you that there are services that have to be continuing and ongoing. The Department for the Blind is there to help people who have become blind learn how to live as a blind person and develop the skills necessary to have a successful and independent life. They also have a tendency to want to help the higher functioning students and the people who are in business. Hannah doesn't get anything really from the Department for the Blind. Her case there has been closed. We can reopen it if we can prove that she needs certain equipment, or if she needs, rehabilitative services or that sort of thing. We can fight through that. But the fact of the matter is, she is served through her job coaches and in her employment, mostly by the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. They don't know anything about working with someone who is blind. The Department for the Blind and the people who are typically expert at working with someone who is blind know very little to anything about people who have autism or intellectual disability. We have to start to work on these things, and we have to make changes so that everyone is able to be serviced and served and have the opportunities to help them reach their very fullest potential and ability to lead an independent life.
Every change